I believe every society that successfully develops, prospers, and survives over a long period of time has as its bedrock the two ideologies of morality and traditionalism. If a society abandons these two vital ideologies, it will fall apart and die. The ideology of traditionalism promotes the path of life in a society. It ensures that each generation grow up to be strong and healthy, so they can give birth to and raise the next generation to be strong and healthy. This is so the torch of culture can be passed down from one generation to the next. In contrast, the ideology of morality is more overarching. It is the ideology that people have used to create, maintain, and advance human civilization. The creation of the first human society was an act of absolute good. All the work that goes into creating, maintaining, and advancing every individual human society is also an act of absolute good. In comparison, all the work that goes into subverting and destroying society is evil. Morality promotes the path of goodness, so that human civilization may continue, and it shuns the path of evil that leads to the destruction of human civilization. Throughout history, most of the societies that have embraced morality and traditionalism did so within a greater religious system. However, I don't believe it's necessary a society is religious for it to successfully utilize these two ideologies. An atheist society that adopts these two ideologies as its bedrock will have the tools it needs to prosper and survive over the long term. Christianity became the dominant religion in the European lands after the fall of Rome. As the Europeans colonized other parts of the globe, they brought Christianity with them, and it became the dominant religion across the globe. From the year 1800 onwards, the atheist movement slowly began to grow in the Western nations. In the 20th century, this movement expanded massively. However, the Church remained a dominant institution throughout the West until the 1960s. At this point, a significant number of people stopped believing in God, and they stopped going to church. They decided to embrace a new liberal value system. The underlying ethos for this new system was that people should be allowed to do whatever they want, whenever they want, as long as they're not breaking the law. The guiding philosophy of this new liberal society has proven to be weak, decadent, and wholly incapable of sustaining a civilization. It is the reason that Western nations are now collapsing into chaos. In all these countries, since the 1960s, marriage and birth rates have plummeted, and the number of people who are celibate has increased massively. These nations have become reliant on mass immigration to run their industries, and they are now destroying their history, culture, and identity. Western society will soon collapse and be taken over by other cultures that are built on a foundation of traditionalism and morality. In Europe especially, we are seeing this process occur with incredible rapidity. Across the continent, Muslim and Black African Christian immigrants are having far more children than the indigenous people of these countries. These traditional religious societies are expanding across Europe, and the indigenous people of these lands are disappearing. This process is known as the Great Replacement. The atheist movement that has now become a dominant movement across the Western world didn't bring with it the gold that existed in the traditional Christian system. I refer to the ideologies of morality and traditionalism. This was a tragic mistake. All civilizations that turn their back on these two vital ideologies collapse into chaos. These societies fall apart because they are incapable of sustaining themselves. If the West is to have a future, it must reconstitute itself with these two ideologies as its foundation. Another fundamental change also occurred during the 1960s. For the first time in human history, women were given access to safe, effective abortion and contraception. Before this point, the cost of sexual intercourse was high for women. Following sex, young women would often become pregnant with no possibility of safely and effectively terminating the pregnancy. Thus, there was an impetus on them to be extremely cautious when it came to having sex. Prior to the 1960s, if a teenage girl started having sex with a number of males, she would very quickly become pregnant. It would be unclear whose baby she was carrying, and if she didn't want the child, there would be no easy way of getting rid of it. The traditional courtship system developed so young men and women could build a relationship with each other on a bedrock of trust. The man would spend time trying to woo the woman. He would try to gain her trust and that of her family. Eventually, they would start dating. In this system, there existed an obligation of no sex before marriage. This obligation was not always adhered to, and in some cases, its failure considerably hastened the date of marriage. However, it remained a strong guiding principle. In this system, children were given the opportunity to enjoy their childhood and to develop into adults at a natural pace. Teenagers were not hypersexualized and they didn't sleep around. The rate of teenage pregnancy was far lower than what it became after the onset of liberal society. In the traditional system, young adults would court their future partner, and if they fell in love, they would build a relationship with their partner on a bedrock of trust. They would go on to marry their partner and create a family with them. The purpose of the no sex before marriage principle was to ensure the couple made the following two commitments: to look after each other for the rest of their life and to create a family with each other. They made these two commitments to each other before they went ahead and created a family with one another. The traditional system exhibited an understanding of the natural connection between sex and childbirth. It helped establish good gender relations in society. It also sought to look after the community, to ensure new families were created and that they prospered. Once women gained access to safe, effective abortion and contraception, the dynamics changed. The cost of sexual intercourse for women was not as high as it had been before. It became far easier for them to enjoy having sex without risking pregnancy. The man could wear a condom, she could take the pill. If she forgot, she could obtain the morning after pill from a pharmacy. If this failed, she could go for an abortion. At the same time, a massive number of people across the West stopped going to church and they stopped believing in God. They embraced a new liberal value system with its ethos of do whatever you want. The courtship system was thrown out, and in its place, young people started going to bars, nightclubs, and parties where they engaged in hedonism and debauchery. In these venues, young people would smoke cigarettes, drink large amounts of alcohol, and take a whole bunch of other drugs. They would hook up with a partner and then head home with them to have sex. Though hookup culture existed prior to the 1960s, it occupied a relatively small sphere in society. After the 60s, however, following the collapse of the church, the fall of traditionalism and morality, the proliferation of contraception and abortion, and the initiation of a new liberal era, hookup culture became ubiquitous across the West. It became the culture. In this hedonistic culture, young people will go out and drink heavily, and then head to a nightclub or party where there is loud music and amorous dancing. They drink so they can get in the zone, become more confident, and attract a partner. In this state, they are able to lower their inhibitions enough so they can convince themselves they want to have sex with someone they don't know. They seek to attain the perfect level of drunkenness so they can become a sexually confident, drunken master. They desire to keep their sharpness and character and yet not get too drunk, so they start slurring their words, repeating themselves, throwing up, blacking out, and falling into oblivion. In this culture, there is the enjoyment of having a good time while taking various drugs, and there is the potential of securing a mate, but there is also the possibility of becoming too intoxicated and facing the negative consequences that can occur as a result. A friend of mine argued the majority of dating today happens in this context. He said the man tries to seduce a woman down a nightclub. Afterwards, they head back to one of their houses and have sex. If both parties are happy with the sex, they build the relationship from there. In other situations, it might be after the couple have had sex, they decide not to build a relationship. He may want to date her, but she would prefer to play the field, and so she moves on to her next partner. Or it might be both parties decide they would prefer to continue playing the field, and so they both move on to their next partner. Or potentially the sex is messy or doesn't happen. The couple agree they made a mistake, and so they both decide to move on. In this hedonistic culture, more recently, we have also seen the rise of online dating. The primary website for such dating is called Tinder. On this platform, people reject potential partners they're not interested in and hook up with those they like. A few couples go on to build relationships after using this site. However, it seems most people do not. Instead, they use the platform to have casual sex with lots of people. This app has created a culture of swiping left, discarding potential partners, and moving on from one partner to the next. It promotes disposability. If someone isn't up to the mark, they get discarded. If a woman isn't pretty enough and can't compete with the other top girls, she gets discarded. If a man isn't alpha enough and hence can't compete with the other top guys, he gets discarded. Liberal society used safe, effective contraception and abortion to sever the connection between sex and childbirth. This system also destroyed the quality of relationships between men and women. Everything became about sex, about making sure you were having sex with the most attractive guy or girl possible. If there was a chance you could be doing better, then it was time to trade up. Relationships were no longer built upon a bedrock of trust. Instead, they were built upon a bedrock of sexual attractiveness and sexual prowess. Women were rated on how good their tits and ass were. Men were rated on how good they were at seduction and in bed. As a result of implementing this terrible system across the Western world, marriage and birth rates plummeted, and an ever-increasing cohort of people emerged who were celibate. It must be said, despite the problems caused by liberal society, there are many people who find their partner in this mess. Some people find their future spouse down a nightclub, on a Tinder date, or in a more conventional setting, such as the workplace. I believe, in total, the new liberal society resulted in the creation of 4 primary groups of people. 2 of these groups fit into the larger category of those who enter into long-term relationships, and the other 2 groups fit into the larger category of those who do not enter into long-term relationships. Here's a breakdown of the 4 groups. Those who enter into long-term relationships. 1. those who get married and have children. 2. Those who enter into a long-term relationship but do not marry or have children. Those who do not enter into long-term relationships. 1. Those who go from one partner to the next. 2. Those who do not enter into relationships at all. Hedonistic culture promotes a lifestyle of sleeping around and going from one partner to the next. A lot of well-adapted young people engage in this lifestyle for a time. As they get older, many people settle down and enter into long-term relationships with their partner. A portion of those in this category get married and have children. However, many people in this category are now not getting married or having children with their partner. In his book, What to Expect When No One's Expecting, the sociologist Jonathan Last describes his hometown. It's a small, rich, liberal town in the USA. In the town, there are many coffee shops, theatres, and lovely parks. There are 5 constantly packed doggy grooming salons and a single toy shop for children. Unfortunately, the children's toy shop is forced to close down due to a lack of business. The author goes on to show that in left-wing liberal states in the USA, the birth rates are far lower than in the right-wing Republican states. He shows the church is a far more prevalent organisation in the Republican states. In this church culture, there is a significantly greater expectation that people will get married and have children. In contrast, in the left-wing states, there are many liberals who do not go to church and they are in a happy relationship with a long-term partner. They are not married and they do not have any children. The author states these couples have a good sex life and they like the extra money and freedom that comes with not having children. Instead of using their relationships to bring children into the world and to raise them, these people use their relationships to find self-fulfillment. With all the extra money they accrue, they go travelling on nice holidays, to the theatre, to rock gigs and sporting events. They buy expensive cars and other technological marvels, and they go shopping. They also usually have at least one dog. After all, raising a dog is far cheaper and less demanding than raising a child. These people enjoy their lives and they live for themselves. Unfortunately, they are not promoting the path of life. The society they were raised in, that they are now running, will end with the death of their generation. They are bringing about the destruction of their civilization. If we now focus on the category of people in liberal society who do not enter into long-term relationships, I previously discussed the group who like to play the field and hook up with one partner after another. This group is similar to those who enter into long-term relationships and don't have children. They use their relationships as a way of finding self-fulfillment. However, instead of doing so with one partner, they cycle through many partners. They do not want to go through the effort of bringing children into the world and raising them. They are also living for themselves and enjoying their life. They too are failing to promote the path of life, and they are bringing about the destruction of their civilization. The final group I have not yet described are those who do not enter into relationships. Some of the labels used for people in this group include Incels and Femcels, MGTOW in some cases, gateway women and spinsters. I believe there are a number of important reasons why celibacy has increased amongst both men and women across the Western world. In this talk, due to time constraints, I will limit myself to a discussion as to why there has been a rise in the number of celibate men in society, and a brief overview as to why there has been a rise in the number of celibate women in society. In the West, since the 1960s, we have seen a massive increase in the number of men who are single and not involved in sexual relationships with women, despite the fact that this is something they would like. The primary reason for this is that these men have a low level of sexual prowess and suffer from erectile dysfunction. There are two primary causes that frequently result in the development of this problem. The first is that the male, as a boy, suffers from child abuse at the hands of his mother or other primary female caregiver. The second is that the male is emasculated as a result of growing up or living in a feminized household, community, and wider society. The relationship between the mother and her son is extremely important. This is also the case if the boy lives with a stepmother or foster mother, and she is his primary female caregiver. In this talk, for the sake of brevity, I will refer to the relationship between the boy and his mother. The points I make are equally applicable when the boy lives under the care of a woman who is not his biological mother. If the boy's mother is abusive towards him, he will develop psychological problems that stem from this traumatic event. This may result in him becoming celibate in later life. The reason for this is that the bond between the mother and her son is extremely important and helps forge all of his subsequent relationships with women. If the mother is loving and tender to her son, and they have a healthy and trusting relationship, he will be able to mirror these positive qualities in all his future relationships with women. He will develop the ability to quickly form loving, healthy, trusting, sexual relationships with females. If we contrast this to a boy who is physically and emotionally abused by his mother, this will have a disastrous impact on his ability to develop relationships with women. Male celibacy in later life is primarily a result of physical and emotional abuse by the mother. It is less likely sexual abuse perpetrated by the mother against her son will lead to this problem. In this situation, the boy is forced to become sexually active at a very young age. Thus, it's unlikely this type of abuse will result in him becoming celibate in later life. However, to be clear, the boy will be enormously traumatized by this abuse, and he will suffer from damaging psychological effects throughout his life. When the mother is physically and emotionally abusive to her son, he will feel he has been bullied, traumatized, judged, and abandoned by all women. These emotions will go on to enforce his primal reactions to women he meets in later life. In this circumstance, the mother is not loving and tender to her son, and they do not develop a healthy and trusting relationship. Instead, the mother is harsh and cruel towards him. When she is physically abusive towards him, she hurts, shocks, and scares him. When she is emotionally abusive towards him, she taunts and demoralizes him. She winds him up and makes him feel pathetic and stupid. When her son then tries to develop relationships with women, all the trauma that existed in his relationship with his mother echoes in the new relationship. He struggles to trust the woman, to show her tenderness and love, and to form a healthy sexual relationship with her. He lacks the confidence to expect love and affection from her, and to create his own sexual identity as a man that is separate from hers. When he goes through puberty, his sexual development is stifled as a result of the abuse he suffered. For other boys who have a good relationship with their mother and are blessed by their mother's maternal care and love, when they go through puberty, they become sexually mature. Due to the positive relationship they had with their mother, they find it easier to create their own sexual identity, which is separate to that of the girl they are attracted to. This process is further assisted if the boy grows up in a household that promotes traditional gender roles, where the father is assertive, masculine, and enjoys a good sex life with the mother. Growing up in such an environment will help the boy become sexually mature during puberty. A common experience suffered by boys who are physically and emotionally abused by their mother is that as a teenager, they will meet a girl who shows them tenderness and love. The boy will then become besotted with the girl. He feels this way because she is the first female to have shown him such love. His mother certainly didn't. At the same time, he becomes needy for this love. It's something he has been deprived of his entire life. When he experiences this feeling, the effect is akin to a man who has been wandering through the desert his whole life, and then one day he finds an oasis and drinks deeply from the water therein. He becomes unwilling to move on from the oasis. He fails to recognize the girl doesn't just want to shower him with maternal love and care. She wants him to play the part of the man, to woo her and to create a sexual relationship with her. As far as she is concerned, he is meant to have had a mother who was there to give him the love and care he needed when he was growing up. That's not her job. Unfortunately, the problem is this never happened. He never had a mother. Instead, he was raised by a despicable monster who did all she could to destroy him. The girl is more attracted to boys who become sexually mature during the puberty phase. She chooses such a boy and rejects the guy who had a bad relationship with his mother and therefore did not become sexually mature during this phase. Thus, the desert wanderer, who went for many years searching for an oasis, who then found such a place and briefly enjoyed it, is cast out. He becomes a wanderer in the desert once more. A major coping strategy a guy in this situation will gravitate towards is masturbation. He will often use porn or erotic fantasy as a masturbation tool. He will use this coping strategy to simulate a sexual relationship. He will go to a porn site, watch a video, project himself into the scene, and then masturbate. Or in the case of erotic fantasy, he will concoct various sexual fantasy situations and let them play out in his head, and he will masturbate to them. The desert wanderer is unable to establish an actual sexual relationship, and so he retreats into the realm of fantasy. He will use masturbation, porn, and his imagination to create a myriad of simulated sexual relationships and encounters to get through life. Like everyone else, in his 20s, the celibate man will go to parties and nightclubs where he will drink enough alcohol so he can forget himself. He will use the Dutch courage alcohol gives him to fake the sexual prowess that other men developed during their successful puberty phase. He may convince a girl to go home with him, but he is still suffering from the same psychological problems that always afflicted him. When he attempts sex with the woman, he will experience erectile dysfunction. At this point, the man's level of sexual prowess has been significantly affected by psychological problems that developed in his childhood. These problems are compounded if he has become reliant on masturbation, porn, and erotic fantasy as coping strategies for his condition, which is extremely likely. All of this will contribute to the man's inability to flourish in the hedonistic society where the primary factor determining whether or not men are successful in the system is their level of sexual prowess. It may be the guy makes out with a number of women and convinces them to go to bed with him, but the problem persists. It is never dealt with. The guy suffers from erectile dysfunction. He is unable to perform. Any woman he manages to seduce will quickly realize this, and she will even more quickly hightail it away from him. Over time, the man's experiences of suffering erectile dysfunction when attempting sex will destroy his general confidence around women. At some point, he will decide rejection is too painful. He doesn't want to continue subjecting himself to this pain. so he stops trying to attract women. He feels women have permanently turned their backs on him, so he permanently turns his back on them. A lot of men who end up in this situation feel they have to pay twice for being physically and emotionally abused by their mother. The first time is when they suffered the abuse. The second time is in their being continually rejected as a partner by females. A very small number of men come to blame all women for forcing this curse upon them, and they engage in acts of violence against women as a way of getting revenge. The incel killers, whose stories make the news, fit into this category. The other cause of the rise of celibacy in men is that in liberal society, males are emasculated as a result of growing up or living in a feminized household, community, and wider society. Ever since the 1960s, the dominant ideology used across the Western world to preside over all issues concerning gender relations is radical feminism. This movement consistently promotes the emasculation and demonization of men. It also continually victimizes women and, wherever possible, gives them unfair advantages over men. The main pillar of feminism is patriarchy theory, which asserts men have always oppressed women throughout history, using violence and coercion. Thus, feminism is needed so women can fight back against evil men to achieve equality. Ever since the 1960s, the ideas and policies created by the feminist movement have been used to trash and subvert gender relations. This ideology has come to dominate government policy, the public sector, the police and court system, the media, education, entertainment, and also workplace policy in every industry. In every nation where radical feminist policies have been implemented, this has resulted in the emasculation of the male population of the country. This constant campaign is directed at boys who are growing up and also towards grown men. Some males are significantly more emasculated than others as a result of this process. They go on to develop psychological problems, which result in their suffering from erectile dysfunction. Men who fall into this trap are unable to compete in a hedonistic culture which judges them as partners based on their level of sexual prowess. Other males have more psychological and social defenses in place that have allowed them to resist this emasculation process. They are able to keep their head above the waterline. In fact, these men often prosper in the system, precisely because it has created a huge shortfall of masculinity. Females are attracted to males who are able to retain their masculinity and sexual prowess. Unfortunately, in an overarching system that is committed to destroying masculinity, there is an ever-increasing number of men who are significantly affected by the emasculation process, and they end up becoming celibate. A number of criticisms are frequently applied to celibate men and given as reasons why these men are unable to find a partner. These criticisms are all incorrect. They include: these men lack confidence. They need to step up their game. They are fat, ugly, or poor. The first notion, that these men lack confidence, is too vague a term and doesn't reveal the truth of the problem. The fact is, there are many different types of confidence. A man's sexual prowess is one type of confidence. It's not the only type. Sexual prowess specifically refers to a man's ability to engage in satisfying sexual intercourse with a woman. Is he able to last the right amount of time? Is he able to please the woman? Is he able to bring her to orgasm? Is he able to take charge the way she wants him to? Initially, a man's level of sexual prowess develops when he goes through puberty. If he has a good relationship with his mother, and his masculinity has been allowed to develop and not strangled during childhood, he will become sexually mature at this stage. Then following puberty, the man's level of sexual prowess is influenced by his experience of having sex with females throughout his life. It's a specific type of competence. The man is able to convey to a woman he is attempting to seduce that she will have a good time if she goes to bed with him. He knows he will be able to show her such a time because of his previous experience with other women. Thus, the projection he is conveying to her is genuine and not fake. The term that accurately describes this ability is sexual prowess and not confidence, which is far too general a term. Celibate men do not lack confidence. They are often confident in many areas of their life. They do, however, lack sexual prowess. The criticism that these men need to step up their game is also flawed because it doesn't take into account their problem, that they lack sexual prowess. Simply telling them they need to step up their game is an empty solution. It doesn't try to solve the problem. The suggestion here is that men who are unsuccessful when it comes to attracting partners simply need to be more successful when it comes to attracting partners. Honestly, if the solution was this simple, the problem wouldn't exist. The final criticism, that celibate men are fat, ugly or poor, is also for the most part incorrect. These negative character traits are limiting factors that will narrow down the number of potential partners a man may secure. Men who are fat, ugly or poor have a smaller selection of partners to choose from. However, in hedonistic culture, this cohort will be able to find a partner, usually one who shares the same negative character traits they do. The primary reason they will struggle with women and will become celibate is if they have low sexual prowess. The problem of male celibacy in Western society has been compounded by an even greater failure. The greater failure is that celibate men are not humanized by their social group or by society. Let's say a man who is part of a particular social group, at the end of a night out with his friends, makes out with a woman in the group and takes her back to his house. He attempts to have sex with her, but is unable to get it up. When he next meets with his friends, he will be laughed at and ridiculed by the other members of the group. If he tries to tell his friends he is celibate and he suffers from erectile dysfunction, once again he will be laughed at and ridiculed. If he informs other people in society of his problem, he will receive a similar response. Society does not take this problem seriously. People will not listen to a man who suffers from this ailment. He will be given advice by others that he should be more confident, get more game, etc. None of this advice is remotely useful. None of it will help him to actually solve his problem. The celibate man isn't humanized, and no effort is put into actually helping him. Eventually, he will be ostracized from his social group. They will reject him because they decide he is pathetic and can't get laid. They will cast him out and he will be forced to move on. There are a few additional issues I believe need to be considered when focusing on the rise of celibate men in the West. There is the problem of low testosterone. This hormone has been falling rapidly in the male population across the world since the 1970s. In a major scientific review of testosterone rates in men around the globe, the researchers found that sperm counts have fallen by over 50% in Europe, North America, Australia and New Zealand between 1971 and 2011. It's extremely likely this problem is at least partly responsible for the rise in celibacy in Western men. One solution to this problem is testosterone therapy, as well as encouragement amongst men to use natural testosterone boosters, such as weightlifting, exercise, dietary changes, and supplements. There is also the issue of the stigmatization of the sex work industry. Men who use prostitutes are seen as being creepy, perverted, sleazy, vulgar, and pathetic. Though I don't have statistics concerning this topic, my belief is that a lot of men, and also women, seek out prostitutes because they are single and lack intimacy in their lives. The men who visit these establishments desire to engage in simple, intimate behaviour with a woman, and by visiting a prostitute, they can have this need met. They do not want to go to a nightclub to try and seduce a woman because they will likely be rejected. They have plenty of experience of this type of rejection, and it has become enormously painful and stressful for them. I don't think it's remotely nice or clever to demonise a man who sees a prostitute because he lacks intimacy in his life. Instead, I think there should be an acceptance that intimacy is important to everyone. It's something we all crave and we all need. Another interesting recent development I've seen in Japan, and now expanding across the first world, is the rise of cuddle cafes. Japan has the lowest birth rate of any nation in the world. The country also has a major problem regarding infertility amongst its men. In these cuddle cafes, a man will pay money so he can take part in simple, intimate interactions with an attractive woman. Sex is barred in these establishments. The man will be thrown out of the premises if he attempts to have sex with the woman. He can pay to cuddle with her, to lie with his head on her lap, or vice versa, to pet her on the head, or to engage in extended eye contact with her. The proliferation of these venues, I think, shows the extent to which many men are deprived of the chance to engage in simple, intimate behaviour with women in liberal society. In addressing this problem, I believe these cuddle cafes serve an important function. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that society should recategorise the act of a man who has low sexual prowess visiting a prostitute or a cuddle cafe as a form of therapy. Furthermore, I think it's important work is completed to ascertain the therapeutic activities that take place in these establishments that can help celibate men to have healthier relationships with women, to improve their level of sexual prowess, and to even help cure them of erectile dysfunction. I believe the treatment of celibate men by our society is entirely disgusting. Liberal society is overwhelmingly responsible for causing this problem. I find it unbelievable the same society thinks it's acceptable to treat men who end up this way like crap, and to throw them out onto the human trash pile. This is incredibly tragic because the vast majority of these men are good people. They work hard to be positive contributors to society. They would like to be married, to be a good husband and a good father. Unfortunately, they are not given the help they need to successfully take on these roles. They are denied help by a society that hates itself and is doing all it can to destroy itself. I think Western society needs to show some care for its men. By doing this, it will show some care for itself, and it will demonstrate it wants to have a future. At present, the West has no future whatsoever. Liberal society is also responsible for a massive rise in the number of celibate women in the West. In hindsight, this secondary failure was completely obvious. It goes hand in hand with the rise in celibate men. In the 1960s, when women were given access to safe, effective contraception and abortion, they were given a power and a responsibility they never had before. They now had the power to prevent or terminate a pregnancy. Before these two technologies, women did not have this level of control regarding when and with whom they became pregnant. Prior to this, they became pregnant due to their natural instincts and afterwards had to suffer childbirth. After these two technologies, women were given direct control over the survival of their society. At this point, they became directly responsible for ensuring the survival of their society. Unfortunately, liberal society did not inform women of this responsibility they had now been given. Instead, they were simply told they had been sexually liberated. They could sleep with whoever they wanted without risking pregnancy. They were now independent and could do as they pleased. Having given women direct control over the survival of their civilization, liberal society placed no expectation on them to keep their civilization alive. In this way, I believe women were set up by liberal society to fail in their own lives and to destroy their society. In this new hedonistic culture, women are rated as partners based on their level of sexual attractiveness. Most young women have a high level of sexual attractiveness. However, they are not told this attribute will fade as they get older, nor are they told they should marry and have children when they're young. Instead, they are encouraged by the society to enjoy their 20s, to sleep around, to be hypergamous, to treat men as disposable, and to concentrate on advancing their career. They can always have children later in life if they want. They're given the advice, marry or don't marry, have children or don't have children, you're still wonderful. These are all terrible messages that liberal society gives to young women. Having been given these messages, many women embrace hedonistic culture. They go out constantly through their 20s and early 30s, becoming paralytically drunk, having one-night stands, going on lots of Tinder dates, playing the field, and enjoying all the attention they're getting from the hot guys who want to date them. But then they get to their mid-30s and they hit the wall. At this point, their sexual attractiveness and their fertility both go into steep decline. Their chances of having any children start to diminish rapidly, and there's a far greater risk, if they do have a child, it will suffer from a genetic deformity. The impact of their sexual attractiveness and fertility going into steep decline is that all the attention they were getting before from men dries up. This highlights an important biological reality. Women are sought after as partners because of their sexual attractiveness and fertility, which are inherently linked. Once they hit the wall, both these traits go into steep decline and men lose interest in them as sexual partners. Instead, they prefer younger women who are sexually attractive and fertile. The reason men prefer younger women is because they can make babies. Through its lies, liberal society has created a vast number of women over the age of 35 who are single and unmarried. They are not desired as sexual partners. This is the primary reason celibacy has increased amongst women in the West. Another major contributing factor is there are many women who suffer from psychological problems that stem from trauma they suffered in childhood. These women are unable to flourish in the hedonistic culture. Like many men, they end up disengaging from the system and checking out. I think it's vital that we understand the extent to which liberal society has failed so many women and we address this problem. I believe the most important change that needs to happen in Western society to ensure that marriage rates increase, birth rates increase, and that there is a massive reduction in celibacy and a corresponding increase in the number of men and women who are in happy sexual relationships is an abandonment of liberal society and a return to traditional society. Earlier in the talk, I described the traditional Christian courtship system and asserted this model developed so young men and women could form a relationship with each other on a bedrock of trust. Having established this foundation, they would go on to create a loving marriage and a family. I believe the vast majority of men and women who have become celibate in liberal society would be happily married with children and would have good sex lives with their spouse if they lived in a traditional society. In many instances, this cohort have been damaged by problems that occurred in their past. They are unable to prosper in a hedonistic culture that rates men and women based on their level of sexual attractiveness and sexual prowess. I believe if this cohort were part of a traditional society, the system would get the best out of them. It would be sensitive to the damage that had been done to them. They would be encouraged to pair off with a partner and to slowly build a relationship with their partner on a foundation of trust. They would be encouraged to be sensitive to any problems their partner may have, to work through these problems and not simply discard their partner. The relationship between the couple would bloom, and they would come to love and trust each other before they got married and had sex. If they then experienced problems relating to sex, they would have already forged a relationship with one another on a strong foundation. Thus, they would have the tools required to deal with this issue and also with any other problems they encountered in the relationship. The traditional system is far more successful than the liberal system for ensuring the majority of the population become married, have good sex lives, give birth to the next generation, and raise them to be strong and healthy adults. The liberal system, in contrast, is a pathetic societal system that results in marriage and birth rates plummeting and a massive number of people ending up single and celibate. Unfortunately, many first world nations have chosen to embrace liberal society. The result of this is that the indigenous population of these countries is in terminal decline. In many cases, the total population of these nations is rising. However, this is due to mass immigration and the higher birth rates of the immigrant cultures. In the UK, the Muslim and African Christian immigrants have far higher birth rates than the indigenous people. This is because they are religious societies built on a bedrock of morality and traditionalism, whereas the British people have adopted liberal society, and so their culture is failing. We are seeing the same pattern across the Western world. The groups in these nations that have adopted liberal society are dying, and those that endorse traditional society are expanding. The reason why this is happening is that traditional society always beats liberal society. Liberal society always dies because it is incapable of maintaining itself, and it is always replaced by traditional society. Traditional society is the only type of society that is capable of ensuring its own growth, prosperity, and survival over a long period of time. Following the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century AD, Christianity became the dominant religion across Europe. The traditional Christian system then helped ensure the survival of all the European lands from this point until the 1960s, when liberal society took over. After they embraced liberal society, the nations of Europe, which survived for the last 1600 years as Christian countries, started to fall apart. By the year 2060, many of these nations will be taken over by immigrant cultures. At this point, the indigenous people of these lands will make up less than 50% of the total population. This is a 100-year period between the embracing of liberal society by Western nations and the death of these nations. I stated at the beginning of this talk that the new atheist system, in its desire to abandon God, threw out all the trappings of the old religious system, including the vital ideologies of traditionalism and morality. This was a tragic mistake. Morality and traditionalism are the gold that existed in our earlier religious system. In their place, liberal society emerged with its underlying ethos that people should be allowed to do what they want, when they want. As I've shown, this disgusting social system has now destroyed much of the West. Even though vast reaches of the Western world have thrown out morality and traditionalism, there are pockets scattered across these lands where Christians and followers of other religions live in communities where they preserve these ideologies and live in a traditional society. I absolutely support religious people who live in such communities. These people are devoting their lives to the preservation and flourishing of their society. Unfortunately, there are many Christians now in the West who follow the Bible, but at the same time, they support liberal values and liberal society. These Christians are not having enough children, and those they bring into the world, they are not raising to be strong and healthy adults able to run their society well. I believe Christianity must abandon liberal society and reconstitute itself as an organisation that ensures the path of life is maintained. I also think there is a significant number of people in the West who believe there is no God. For these people, they cannot easily go back to believing in a God. Thus, I think it's vital the atheist movement also adopts as its bedrock the ideologies of morality and traditionalism. I believe it's absolutely possible for an atheist society to be founded and sustained atop these two ideologies. If atheist society makes this change, it will have the tools it needs to prosper and survive for thousands of years. One option open to atheists and agnostics is to return to the church as cultural Christians. They can support traditionalism and morality and the other customs of the church without fully accepting its metaphysical beliefs. The other option they have is to build their own atheist system upon a foundation of morality and traditionalism. I believe this new system should be a constructive venture that embraces the mythological stories and morality that appear in the Bible and also focuses on other ancient myths and the incredible insights that exist in these stories. I also believe there is a need to rejuvenate these older stories with more recent knowledge that has been ascertained in the subjects of sociology, psychology, and cultural anthropology. I believe both Christian and atheist society must be centred around an organisation where the local community regularly meet so they can develop and sustain relationships over time, and so they can offer each other support and guidance. There is a need to ensure the children who are born into this system grow up to be strong and healthy. Then, when they are young adults, they should marry. One man should marry one woman, and they will marry for life. The couple will commit themselves fully to each other. They will bring new children into the world. The woman will be the caregiver and nurturer to these young children. The man will be the protector and provider for the family and the head of the household. The children will be raised in this traditional family setup to be strong and healthy. So when they grow up, they have the strength and moral fortitude necessary to run their society well. As adults, they will ensure the survival and prosperity of their civilization. They will give birth to the next generation and will raise them well. This work must be completed so that the torch of culture is passed down from one generation to the next, and so the society remains strong over time. These customs are vital for any society that wishes to survive and flourish over time. This can be proven logically and scientifically. This is why it is essential both Christians and atheists must embrace morality and traditionalism. I believe in this way a bridge can be built between the ancient system of myth and religion and the modern system of science and logic. Ultimately, the purpose of both systems is to ensure the survival of human society and the salvation of individual people. The problems of radical feminism, MGTOW, Incels and Femcels are all recent failures that occurred in Western nations ever since these lands adopted liberal society and subsequently fell into chaos. Western society was built upon a bedrock of morality and traditionalism, and it survived for thousands of years because it kept this foundation in place. If the West wishes to survive and flourish into the future, then both Christians and atheists must build their society upon a foundation of morality and traditionalism. Thank you.